So I'd be really curious if anybody took me up on my suggestion of doing nothing, seeing what that's like and what you noticed. But you can go anywhere. Any question is welcome. Any report is welcome. All right, Catalina, your hand's up. Go ahead and unmute.
Hello. Of course, I took you in that experiment of not doing nothing. Because actually, I am right now in a kind of self-retreat. I decided myself that I'm going to create the conditions to keep doing meditation and trying to not be cluttered with this doing. And it had been a challenge because in a way, I catch myself all the time very uncomfortable of not being in the doer, and like my value as a human being is nothing.
Oh,
because
yes.
because I'm not, I'm not working, or I'm not doing anything, just doing meditation, walking. The only one that I play oboe, that's the only one, but I'm playing very, very in a completely different way, like totally conscious about my body, conscious about, be very present. So it had been like another practice, So, but at the same time, I took you about like not doing nothing. So I just sit down outside and just sit down and nothing. And the experience is wonderful. Just like feeling the air, hearing the birds, even seeing the moon. So I did it several times, and it's a challenge because the doer is there, and as you said, the one who is criticized, like, oh, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and look, this is like the list of things. Especially if you own a house or you own a business, it's like the list is huge. Yeah.
I understand.
But I was going to comment about your thing about that moments that comes, the beautiful moment that comes of being present, totally present. I have been lucky enough to experience that moments, and it comes from nowhere. And I cannot say when they're coming. And even like after it comes, they say, what was that? Like the whole feeling was eerie, like I was in a different dimension, totally different dimension. And it felt beautiful. It felt sad that exists, extremely sad that does exist, and I cannot go there willingly, So yeah, that's the thing that make me that I feel that going into that place of deep reality, like a cup of tea, or just being there and feel the air and feel everything to such a deep extreme like reality and simplicity, and it's like being immersed, totally being immersed in the thing, like with the music, being the music, with the cup of tea, being the whole time. The whole time stops. There is no time. It's timeless, totally timeless. But at the same time, it gives me a lot of grief and sadness that does exist, and I cannot gear my life towards being able to live in that place. That's what I want to share.
Right. Thank you, Catalina.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was very, very helpful, your observation that it's hard to do nothing because your value, I think you're speaking for everybody in this culture, that our value is so much placed on what we do, what we accomplish. And so there's often this feeling when you stop of being worthless. Like, I'm not doing the things that I do to need to make myself worthwhile. And there's this fear, excuse me, this fear of worthlessness. So important to turn toward that because it's such a phantom, you know. True worth lies beyond it, beyond this sort of artificial worth that we're creating by doing. A real worth is inherent. It doesn't need anything to support it, but we don't feel that. We're alienated from it. So that's one thing. The other, you spoke about how these moments of presence, they just arise, like the conditions come together, and there you are. And how they, the sense of I in us wants to be able to like produce that on demand. It wants to be able to master it, so to speak. I always like the word meditation master. It's such an oxymoron. But that's what the ego wants. The ego wants to have control and to be able to choose this. And yet the paradox actually is that's what's standing in the way of it. That's actually what's standing in the way of it. Those moments of pure presence is when the sense of I just ceases. It just subsides. It just subsides for a moment. And we're with that almost crystalline clarity of presence. And because our conditioning is such that, that sense of self is going to arise, it may not last very long. It may not last very long. But in that moment, there's a possibility that you'll just wake up to this being, what really is happening. This is what's really true. It's that other thing that's going I, me, mine over everything. It's not fully true. Not really. There's just a possibility that will happen in one of those moments. And again, it's frustrating because we want to make it happen. Like how can I get enlightened? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but enlightenment is what you can't get or lose. It's part of its nature. All right. Well, enjoy your ability to create meditation retreat-like conditions in your life for as long as it lasts, and be well. I can say a little bit more. It's really important to realize that our egos don't want to rest. They don't actually want to be happy. They thrive on unhappiness. They thrive on things not being right. They thrive on moving towards something in the future. They thrive on problems. They really do. And yet they're pretending to solve all those problems. That's what's so funny, is this very character inside that's trying to solve all our problems and get us to where we'll be happy is the one kind of standing in the way the whole time. Catch yourself sometime. Catch yourself. See if you can see it, the not wanting to be happy. That aspect of you which actually needs a problem. It's like our sense of self needs a problem to exist. No problem, no self. Oh, well, I better have a problem. And then I'll know who I am. If I have a problem, then I know who I am. If I don't have a problem, oh, what do I do? Who am I? So forth. Just a pointer. All right, who else would like to speak? So, Donna.
Hi, I have an observation for the past week, and nothing profound or anything, but you had given us, try to watch, pay attention to us looking for things that are wrong, and then looking for things to do.
Mhm.
And I just realized that I do this all the time, but especially around what I was talking about in the first class, which is pain. So I have a lot of chronic pain, and so a lot of what I do, well, I do it certainly in meditation, but it just even all the time, it's just scanning, to find where the pain is. And then all of a sudden now something is wrong. And there's this whole little subtext of, trying to figure out what's wrong, which with chronic pain, you don't always know what's wrong, or it just is what it is. And then the whole to-do list of like, well, I need to go exercise, or I need to call a doctor, or I need to do this, or, and yeah, it was just watching it is like such a vicious cycle. But then tonight, adding in the piece about the question about, is this suffering or is this not suffering, seemed to me very interesting, because years ago in one of your classes, you gave me a tool to use with, I have aging parents that I've been dealing with for a long time, and they can be very difficult. And I think at one point you said, well, you can just sit down and acknowledge this is suffering, and you don't necessarily have to change anything. And that's been very helpful. Not obviously not all the time, but when I can get to that point where, I'm sitting across from my mother and I'm like, okay, this is human suffering, and I can just accept that. And now I want to see, well, maybe I can do that. I can ask those questions to myself when I'm watching myself spin out over, my to-do lists and what's wrong and all that stuff. Just, I don't think I've ever really turned it inward at all. So.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, and thanks for that report of something from years ago that has meant a
I
lot.
use it all the time, or try to use it all the time.
Yeah, I have over the years. I've used this. This is suffering. It's a phrase right out of the Buddhist suttas. Idam dukkam. This is suffering, and it has that way of just kind of like cutting through to what's right in front of you, and it doesn't any sense of, it shouldn't be. It's not. There may be a skillfulness to avoid it. Certainly, that's a lot of the teaching, but just the recognition of human suffering, and just there it is. There it is. And the body is such a teacher for that. Pain.
I mean, in a way, oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, in a way, if you're just acknowledging this is suffering, and then you're not actively trying to change it, in a way, you're sort of coming to rest in suffering.
You're coming to
right?
rest.
Like it's like you're maybe momentarily, like it may not last more than 5 minutes, or
exactly. There's a moment of letting down one's resistance and aversion, and just letting it be what it is. Yeah, letting that subside, and that is an end of suffering. Moment when resistance subsides, suffering ends. At least the suffering that was being produced by the resistance. It doesn't mean that the uncomfortable sensation ends, but it means the resistance ends, and suddenly one is at peace. Maybe not eternal peace. You're right. It's maybe only 10 seconds. But notice it. Notice it. Notice what happens when resistance ceases. I mean, I think it's probably biggest lesson of all of life. But I think when it comes to pain, it's really the lesson of pain, you know. I might just also add that, no, if there's something to do to make yourself more comfortable, of course, do it. When you notice, pain in yourself or pain in someone else, there may be something to do about it. Of course, do it. But, somehow the doing of that goes so much better if you're not resisting it. When someone's suffering that you're with, the experience of kind of resisting their suffering. It's like there's some aversion up about it, and then you try to help them in their suffering, but it's coming out of this like trying to help yourself because you feel so much aversion for them suffering and being miserable, and it doesn't come off very well. If actually you come from this kind of subsiding of aversion, like this is suffering, you may actually know what to do in a much clearer way. And right now I'm thinking more of other people's suffering, the way that we get wrapped up in other people's suffering and we want them to be better, but it's really us that we want to be better because we're put in some sort of pain by their pain, that whole kind of thing where we get all enmeshed. And so that coming to rest in what is such a powerful place to relate to someone from. Might actually be more helpful. Okay, anyone else?
Interesting topic for tonight. I actually missed class last week because about 20 minutes before I was going to log on, I got a call from the assisted living where my mom lives telling me that she had cut her finger at some point during the day and it wouldn't stop bleeding. So they had called the EMTs and they told her it was fine, but she didn't believe them that it was fine. And she wanted to go to the emergency room. So they were taking her to the emergency room. And I was pretty irritated. Like, like I'm going to talk about aversion and resistance and all the things. And but I knew I couldn't let her go by herself and not be there. And so I was so I went and I just we've clearly had a kind of fraught relationship for a long time, but she's getting more forgetful and more confused, and I'm finding it easier to find compassion for her and and soften to that suffering. And by the time she got there, she was no longer really worried about the finger because they had wrapped it up real well. And so she could no longer see the blood. So now she was irritated that she had to wait and sit there and she was uncomfortable and like it's stupid that she had to sit in the hall and why didn't they give her a room? And, of course they didn't give her a room because it's the emergency room and they were like, oh my, what's going on? And, even 6 months ago, I would have been like, yeah, I know, right? Like, you're right. This is stupid. but instead, like, I started just kind of finding the humor in it. And it got to the point that we were almost like this comic team. Like the nurses were all hanging out with us because we were just kind of cracking up because she really was like, I just distracted her and it turned into this really kind of fun night at the emergency room, oddly enough. So yeah. Yeah. So and she's fine. So that helped. But but I thought a lot about it, like they were going to just send her there and she would have sat there and been alone and confused and scared. And I could have said, well, it's fine. I know she's fine. Um, and I'm glad that I didn't. And then, like when we got home, I brought her back home and hung out with her for a little while and watched some bad racist Western and for a half an hour or so until she like settled and like got back into her comfort zone. And on my ride home, it's about a half an hour ride. Instead of listening to music or listening to my podcast or listening to my audiobook, I just rode home in quiet. And it was nice. So it ended up being okay. And yeah, nothing
Wow.
profound, but it was okay. And
Oh, I wouldn't say nothing profound. It was a very rich experience of being human.
yeah,
Very rich experience of being human.
yeah.
And
And
I would never want to like have anybody come away from this class thinking that they shouldn't feel aversion, because you do feel aversion. Aversion arises.
mm,
And that too, you know,
mhm,
that too, say this is suffering
mhm,
and feel the disappointment. Oh, I was going to go to class and instead I'm going to go sit in the emergency room, you know,
yeah,
and how that didn't turn out as you might have anticipated.
mm,
Your image of how bad it would be sitting in the emergency room didn't actually happen.
mhm,
Surely a fantasy, purely imagination.
right? Yeah,
Anyway, all these moments of wisdom.
right. And I'm
Yeah.
just grateful after all this time that I'm beginning to be better at finding that compassion and letting go of a lot of anger.
Hmm.
That's
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 really
a real gift.
that's really good news.
Yeah.
That's ending suffering. Yeah, that's that's what we're here for. All right, thank you, Sandy. Diane.
I have not attempted yet doing nothing unless being at the dentist today counts, because you're sort of at the mercy of not being able to speak or whatever. But I was listening to a podcast interview today that's wonderful because, again, it's like can't drive a car and not also be learning something. So I really need to work on the doing. But it was an interview, wonderful interview with Arthur C. Brooks, who writes, who has written a couple of books about happiness. He teaches at, I think, Harvard Business School. And there were many gems. I'll have to listen to it again. But one of them was discussing awe and the power of awe. He also talked about like the neuroscience of awe. And I was thinking about how it just helps to feel small and makes all of the urgency of doing a little bit less
Yes.
urgent at every time I, especially on vacation, but it could be a walk in the neighborhood and can just take me away from that, um, the intensity of having to do every moment. So awe, I think, was helpful to think about today.
Beautiful. Yeah. Oh, it kind of takes you out of the self-importance,
Yes.
everything being urgent that is in your life. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I think I've heard his name. I don't know that I've listened to a podcast by him, but sounds very good. So we're about at the end of our time. I would suggest you continue to do nothing. Those of you who haven't tried, try, see what it's like to just take a period of time, however short, and see what is to be doing nothing. But it would be truly to just come to a still point, come to a rest around activity and just be. And come back and let us know what you notice. All right? So everyone be well. I'll talk to you next week.